Hey all, Tom Moran here from Tom's Big Spiders. For this episode, we're going to be looking at Megophobema robustum, or the Colombian giant redleg. I've received many requests for a husbandry video about these guys over the course of the years. Unfortunately, I didn't get my first till about 2 years ago. Now I've had 4, so I figure it's about time to break this out. Now this one will be a rehousing, and I'll be rehousing my sling, but I did get some good pictures and some good images of my larger specimen that I believe is a young adult female, fingers crossed. I also had a male mature out last year, so we've raised a couple of these guys up to adulthood. It's time to take a look at what's worked for me as far as the care. So enough of me talking. Let's get into the actual video. Okay, so this is probably the most requested spider I have as far as people asking for husbandry information on them, and unfortunately I didn't keep them for a while, and then when I got one I had to kind of grow it up so I could be able to talk about it. But here we have the M. robustum. I get tons of emails, comments, when can you do one of these? So this is going to be one of the rehousing ones where we rehouse it and I talk a bit about my experience with them. I will do a featured species on them further down the road, which is one of my cleaner husbandry videos. I like to do those on species that I've raised several of, and basically I've had two, one matured out male, full adult, one is a young immature female. I'm hoping, I actually haven't sexed her out, but I'm hoping that she's a female. And then I just picked up 2 more, sling and a juvenile, so I will have raised 4 of these hopefully by the time I make that video. But anyway, I know people have been waiting for it, so here we go. So the M. robustum, the big keys for these guys right off the bat, if there's any point you take away from this, is that they are fossorial, they burrow. I know some people come out and say theirs haven't burrowed, but I've spoken to many other people that have ones that will burrow right on through adulthood, and they appreciate some moist substrate. This is a species that when I put it into an enclosure with my larger one, I let it dry out a bit. I added water to one side of the enclosure. She had a tunnel back here. I didn't want to flood her tunnel, so I did the opposite side. Well, she tunneled underneath and got into the area with the moist substrate. So that's something that always is an indication to me that they do appreciate things moist. Again, I'm sure people out there, somebody will come up and say, I keep mine dry with a water dish, whatever works for you, but this is just my observations with this species. So moist, give them some depth. But I did have an issue with one of mine, and I'll show the enclosure over here. It's currently in this one. It's about 1.25 inches long. What happened was when I opened these guys up, the first one I opened up was big. I assumed the second one was going to be big, but it was much smaller. And I put it into this enclosure here that is about 6 by 4.5 by about 8.5, I think, or 9. Decent sized enclosure. Well, what happened was it buried all the way down to the bottom, filled up the area in here, filled up the front of its burrow, and didn't appear for several months. And it looked like it was probably in pre-molt when it went down, but when it didn't surface for a while, I got nervous. I took up the cork bark, I dug it up, I normally don't do this, and it was down the bottom, it had molted, its abdomen was absolutely tiny, and it wasn't coming up to eat. So what I did is put it in the smaller enclosure that I just showed. It ate immediately. So again, this is something we don't talk about a lot in the hobby. For years they've told you with fossorial species, give them as much substrate as you can, but I do think that for some of these guys, they will dig. If you give them 8 inches and it's a little sling, it'll dig all the way down the bottom. It won't sense the prey up top. And there's been a lot of talk about whether in nature, if they dig tunnels that deep, if they will find things under the ground to eat so they don't even have to surface. So just something to keep in mind when we talk about the fossorial ones and the ones that burrow, don't overdo it as far as depth. So what we're going to do is we're going to get this little one in here. I'll show it. These guys are gorgeous even as slings. Now, my first one I want to mention was gifted to me by Samantha Miller in April of 2018, and I will show footage of her later on. I had another one after that I got as a freebie because she sent me this one. I immediately loved it and wanted another one because I wanted to make sure I got a female. Well, as it turns out, the second one I bought, which was larger at the time, ended up being a male. It matured, and like a doofus, I don't think I ever got footage of him. So we're going to try to poke this one out. Now these guys have a really cool, I hadn't seen the slings do it, but I've seen an adult do it. They have a really cool defense technique where they basically stick their bums in the air and they spin around and kick their back legs at you. And they have little spiny hairs on their back legs that supposedly hurt if you get hit with them. And it's very interesting. Again, I've only seen it happen once. Very interesting display. Whoop, 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 whoop. No, you're out. No, you're out. Your new home. All right, I'll let Billy get a close-up of this one. This one here is probably about 2 inches now. I struggled over what size of enclosure to put it in because this is obviously a good size sling / juvenile. Next molt, I'm guessing it's going to be more about that big. So these are guys that I would be prepared to do an extra rehousing. I would not necessarily, from what I saw from my sling that buried itself and didn't come up to eat, I would not necessarily screw around and put these guys in giant enclosures early on. So for example, if you have one this size, you go, you know what, I'm going to stick it in a 5-gallon enclosure. I'd worry about it surfacing. That's something I've noticed. They do continue that burrowing behavior as they put on size. I had somebody emailed me the other day. It was a hilarious picture. They're like, this is my 7.5, 8-inch female M. robustum, and it was just a tank of dirt, and we kind of got a good giggle over it because they will remain fossorial as they put on some size. What a beauty. So for slings for this species, if you got a little tiny one, the old large dram bottle would work great, or a 5-ounce deli cup. Again, you want to make sure you give it enough substrate to burrow, but not too much it gets lost. I would not use a 32-ounce deli cup with these guys. I can say that right off the bat. That I think that would be way too much. They enjoy a little sphagnum moss to keep some moisture in there. If you can fit a water dish in, obviously put a water dish in. I do have a water dish for this one that's sitting right down in here. And slings eat great. I've had no problem with mine taking down live prey, so I didn't have to do the old pre-kill. But remember, if you got one that's not hunting well or doesn't seem to be taking the prey because it's too large, feel free to drop in some pre-killed. They grow relatively quickly, so if you do start them in a dram vial or something smaller, be prepared to do a rehousing rather early on, and then you can put them into something a little bit bigger. 16-ounce deli cup, something around that size, would probably be perfect for a smaller sling. Now juveniles, this one here is probably a little over a gallon and a half, something 1 to 2 gallons or so for juvenile, and for the sake of argument in this case, for juveniles, we'll talk about something that's like 2.5 inches or so. So this is what I'm using. Again, I wouldn't go much bigger than this, and if Billy wants to just pan up for a second, we almost put her in this one here like the other one, but I feel like she's going to outgrow it much more quickly. This one here is about 6.5 inches or so by maybe 4 by 5, so a little bit smaller. I figured once we put the spider in there, it was going to be a little too big for this. So keep in mind with cages, there's no exact science as far as sizes. I know people ask me, how do you know what size to put them in? We didn't know what size to put it in until about 2 seconds before we started this video. I was still debating it. Juveniles, again, will burrow, so give them enough substrate to burrow in. Keep the substrate moist, at least half of the substrate. I don't let it dry out in between. I'll let part of it dry out, but I always keep the bottom layers moist. Water dish. Here I've got some leaf litter and stuff just because it looks nice. And what I did was I used a piece of cork bark in here for a starter burrow. I give all of my fossorial species starter burrows. I know there's literature out there that says that if you have a fossorial species, don't bother giving it a burrow. They will make their own. It can take them much longer to actually settle in enough to start their own burrow if you don't give them something to hide beneath when they're first put into the enclosure. So hopefully what this one will do is go in here. I stuffed it with some sphagnum moss to make it a little tighter because again, when you give them a hide, you want to make sure it's tight. They like smaller spaces. They don't want some big vacuous, burrow in here. So I put some sphagnum in there to stuff it. Hopefully it'll go in here, start digging, and we'll see, the dirt piling up. And always leave some room for the dirt on top. That's one thing I see is people will fill up their enclosures with dirt, and the spider will start digging, and you get it packed all the way to the top, and you don't want that. Again, great eaters, but at this size, this one here will easily take down a medium cricket. Puts on a little more size. I'll probably start dropping in large crickets. As for feeding, how often I feed, it's up to you. There's no set right or wrong schedule. I usually feed my slings twice a week, unless I give them a big meal, then it's once a week. Once they hit juvenile stage, it's usually once a week or so, sometimes once every other week. And adults, if you're feeding them a lot in one setting, you could go every other week, you could go once a month. Just pick a feeding schedule that works for you. And then for adults, what I will be putting my adults in, and we will show it, I will flash it up on screen. This is my young adult. Right now, she's in an enclosure that's about 14 inches by about 7.5 inches deep by about 7.5, 8 inches wide. That one, she's already outgrown it, so we're looking for something better. So that would be a good size for a larger, or a young adult. For a full adult, I'm looking at something around 10 gallons or so probably for them, because again, we want to make sure we give them enough depth to burrow. They are a larger species. They can hit 7, 7.5, 8 inches. Nice leggy orange spiders, so make sure you give them enough space. And again, don't set them up terrestrial. I've seen many photos over the years of people that have wondered why theirs are so defensive, and it's because they're not given enough room to burrow. So I think that about covers it for M. robustum. Again, the key, give them some room to burrow, keep the substrate moist. They're great eaters. They grow quickly. They are beautiful, highly sought after spiders, at least in the States. I know every time everybody gets them in, people go nuts, and I get a lot of emails and comments going, hey, do you have any videos on these? So hopefully this will help some people get started, and then somewhere down the road, we'll do one of the nicer ones where we really break the whole thing down. But in the meantime, M. robustum, awesome spiders. Definitely encourage everybody to pick one up. And thanks again for Samantha for actually introducing me to these guys and getting me my first. So again, the key with these guys is moist substrate. I have found that all of mine seem to appreciate the moisture and give them some depth as far as substrate is concerned, so they can continue on giving them depth right up through adulthood. Again, this is one of these species I've heard of people having very defensive specimens, and then when I ask to see some setups, some pictures of setups, some videos of setups, what I notice is they're given very little substrate in a hide, and that could you can end up there with a more defensive spider because they do want to dig, burrow, and hide. And I have spoken to several keepers that have given their adults the space to burrow, and they seem to continue to burrow right on through, even though they hit that 7.5, 8-inch mark. So something to be aware of when you pick these guys up. They are awesome spiders. There's a reason why they fly off the shelves when they're available at vendors, and people seem to really dig them. So hopefully this will help some of you out that pick them up on how to set them up correctly. So that will do it for this one. As always, if you liked the video enough to subscribe, very much appreciated. You click the circle right up there. If you'd like to check out some more videos, see what I'm about, you can find them over there. Please feel free to comment. I answer all comments, although I've been really behind lately because I've been getting a lot of them, but know that I will eventually get around it as I work my way through. Thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you guys next time.